My name is Claire Bennett, and for most of my life, I believed the worst conversations about inheritance happened after someone died. I was wrong. They started while my mother was still sitting on her own front porch, watering the roses she had planted with my father 40 years earlier. Looking back now, I realize the first warning wasn't an argument or a legal document. It was silence. The kind of silence that settles over a family when everyone begins calculating what they might gain instead of appreciating what they still have. At the time, I didn't recognize it. I was 42 years old, divorced, and worked as a physical therapist at a rehabilitation clinic just outside Asheville, North Carolina. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. My patients measured success in small victories, a few extra steps, a little less pain, and that had taught me to value progress over perfection. My younger brother, Ryan, had always been different. He believed success should happen quickly. He chased opportunities, investments, and shortcuts with the same enthusiasm most people reserved for dreams. Sometimes those risks paid off. More often, they didn't. Still, he always managed to explain away his failures as someone else's fault. Our mother, Eleanor Bennett, was 76. Her memory remained remarkably sharp, though arthritis had slowed her hands enough that opening jars or climbing the porch steps took patience she rarely admitted needing. She refused to leave the family home. "I buried your father from this house," she'd say whenever someone suggested assisted living. "I'm not leaving it until they carry me out." None of us argued with that. At least I didn't. Every Saturday morning, I drove the 40 minutes to her house. We drank coffee from the same faded blue mugs she'd owned since I was a child. She always baked something, even if she complained about her aching wrists the entire time. The smell of cinnamon somehow made every difficult year of my life seem farther away. That house held memories in every room. The scratch on the dining table where Dad accidentally dropped his toolbox. The hallway where Ryan and I raced toy trucks until Mom threatened to hide them forever. The porch swing Dad rebuilt 3 different times because Mom refused to replace it. To anyone else, it was just an old farmhouse. To us, it was the place our family had been built. One Saturday afternoon, while we were trimming rose bushes together, Mom surprised me. "Claire," she said quietly, keeping her eyes on the flowers, "have you noticed your brother asking unusual questions?" I looked up. "What kind of questions?" She clipped another stem before answering. "Oh." She smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "The house." I waited. "He keeps asking whether my will is current." The pruning shears stopped moving. "And whether I've thought about putting the property into a trust." Something inside me tightened. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I wasn't planning on dying this week." She laughed softly. I laughed too, but neither of us found it very funny. Ryan hadn't always been like this. Or maybe he had. When we were children, he'd insist on opening birthday presents that weren't his. If Grandma gave us each $20 for Christmas, Ryan somehow spent his before dinner and started asking whether I planned to use mine. Mom used to call it impatience. Dad called it entitlement. Years later, I realized Dad had been closer to the truth. A few days later, Ryan invited both of us to dinner. He sounded unusually enthusiastic. "I found a great Italian place," he said over the phone. "My treat." Mom raised an eyebrow after I hung up. "Your brother paying?" She smiled. "Maybe the world's ending after all." Dinner began pleasantly enough. Ryan talked about business opportunities. His wife, Melissa, smiled politely while checking her phone every few minutes. Mom enjoyed the pasta and even ordered dessert. Then Ryan leaned back in his chair and folded his hands together. "I've been thinking," he said. Those 4 words instantly changed the atmosphere. Mom looked at him. "So have I." He smiled. "You know this house is getting harder for you to maintain." "I manage. But should you have to?" She didn't answer. Ryan continued anyway. "The market's incredible right now." I watched Mom's expression carefully. She remained calm. "You could sell." "No." "You could move somewhere easier." "No." "We're only thinking about your future." This time she looked directly at him. "No." The table fell quiet. Melissa suddenly found the dessert menu fascinating. I reached for my glass of water. Ryan forced another smile. "I just don't want us making decisions under pressure later." Mom placed her fork neatly beside her plate. "The only person under pressure seems to be you." No one spoke for several seconds. When dinner ended, Mom thanked Ryan for the meal as though nothing uncomfortable had happened. But while we walked toward our cars, she slipped her hand through my arm. "Promise me something." "What? If anyone starts treating me like I'm already gone..." She looked back toward the restaurant. "Remind them I'm still here." I squeezed her hand. "You won't need reminding." She nodded. "I hope not." That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of what Ryan had said, because of what Mom hadn't. She wasn't frightened. She was disappointed. There is a difference. Fear looks toward the future. Disappointment looks backward. As I lay awake, I kept replaying dinner in my mind. Ryan hadn't sounded concerned about Mom's health. He'd sounded concerned about timing. At the time, I convinced myself I was overthinking everything. I wanted to believe we were still the family my parents had spent decades holding together. I didn't know that, less than 2 weeks later, I would walk into my mother's living room and find strangers taking photographs of furniture they had no right to value. And that would be the moment I understood the inheritance battle had already begun. Even though my mother was still very much alive, the following Saturday started like every other one. I stopped at the little bakery on Merriman Avenue and bought 2 cinnamon rolls because Mom always insisted one wasn't enough, even though she never finished the first one. The woman behind the counter smiled when she saw me. "Your mother's favorite." As always, some routines feel permanent. They trick you into believing life is more predictable than it really is. I remember humming along with the radio as I drove the familiar country roads toward the farmhouse. The maple trees were beginning to lose their leaves, covering the shoulders of the road with patches of orange and gold. It was beautiful in the quiet way autumn often is. Nothing warned me that everything was about to change. When I turned into Mom's gravel driveway, I immediately noticed 2 unfamiliar SUVs parked beside the barn. One was black, the other was white. Neither belonged to anyone in our family. I frowned. Mom rarely had visitors without mentioning them first. As I stepped out of my car, I heard voices drifting from inside the house. Not conversation, business. Confident, efficient, detached. The front door was wide open. That alone made my stomach tighten. Mom never left the front door open. Not even during summer. I walked inside without knocking. The first thing I saw was a man carrying a professional camera through the living room. He paused beside my father's handmade bookshelf and snapped several photographs. Another man stood near the fireplace writing notes on a clipboard. A third was measuring the dining room with a laser device. For several seconds, nobody noticed me. I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. It felt as though I had walked into someone else's life. What is going on? Every head turned. The photographer lowered his camera. The man with the clipboard looked pleasantly surprised. "Oh," he smiled politely. "You must be Claire." My heart skipped. "How do you know my name?" We were told the family had been informed. Informed of what? Before anyone answered, I heard my mother's voice from the kitchen. "Claire." She sounded confused. Not frightened. Confused. I hurried toward her. She was standing beside the sink, gripping the edge of the counter with both hands. Her face looked unusually pale. "What happened?" She looked at me as though she expected me to explain. "They said they're evaluating the property." I blinked. "For what?" "I don't know." One of the men stepped into the kitchen. He offered an apologetic smile. "I'm David Foster with Blue Ridge Property Consultants." He held out a business card. I didn't take it. "What are you doing in my mother's house?" "We're conducting a preliminary valuation." "Who hired you?" There was the smallest hesitation. Then he answered. "Your brother." Everything inside me went still. My brother has no authority to hire anyone to evaluate this property. We understood he was acting on behalf of the owner. I looked toward Mom. She shook her head immediately. "I never authorized anything." The room became very quiet. David glanced toward the others in the living room before looking back at me. "I'm sorry. There appears to be some misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" I struggled to keep my voice steady. "You've been walking through my mother's home taking photographs of her belongings without her permission." His professional smile disappeared. "If that's the case, we'll stop immediately." He turned toward his team. "Pack everything up." Within seconds, the atmosphere changed. Tape measures disappeared. Clipboards closed, camera bags zipped. No one argued. No one defended themselves. They simply gathered their equipment and quietly left the house. As the last vehicle disappeared down the driveway, the silence that remained felt almost heavier than the intrusion itself. Mom slowly lowered herself into Dad's old recliner. "I thought maybe—" She stopped. "What?" She looked around the room. "I thought maybe I had forgotten agreeing to something." That sentence broke my heart. Not because it was true, because she genuinely questioned herself before questioning everyone else. I knelt beside her chair. "You didn't forget." She closed her eyes for a moment. "I hate getting older." I reached for her hand. "This has nothing to do with your age." She squeezed my fingers. "Are you sure?" I wasn't. Not anymore. An hour later, I drove straight to Ryan's office. I didn't call first. I wanted to see his face before he had time to prepare one. His logistics company occupied the second floor of a renovated brick warehouse downtown. The receptionist recognized me immediately. "Claire," she smiled. "Ryan's in a meeting. I'll wait." It only took 3 minutes before he appeared. He looked surprised, then cautious. "What are you doing here?" "We need to talk." His smile faded. "In my office." The door closed behind us. Neither of us sat down. "You hired a property company." His expression barely changed. "They stopped by?" "They walked through Mom's house." I was trying to help. By sending strangers into her living room? They were only gathering information. "Without permission." Ryan sighed dramatically. "Claire, you're making this bigger than it is." "No, I'm finally seeing it for exactly what it is." He crossed his arms. "Mom needs to start thinking realistically." She is thinking realistically. She's 76 and alive. He looked away for a brief moment. Nobody's trying to hurt her. "Then why didn't you ask her first?" Silence. "Ryan, answer me." His jaw tightened. I didn't think she'd understand the financial side of it. I stared at him. Our mother balanced Dad's construction business for 25 years. She understands money just fine. That's different. No, it's inconvenient for you. He laughed once, a short, humorless sound. "You always think I'm the villain." I didn't. Until now. For the first time, irritation flashed openly across his face. "You have no idea how expensive it is to keep that place running." "I know exactly how expensive it is. I've been helping Mom pay the maintenance bills for almost a year." His eyes widened. "You what?" "I didn't tell you because she asked me not to." He blinked. "You've been giving her money?" "No. I've been helping my mother. There's a difference." He looked genuinely unsettled, almost as if a piece of information he should have known had suddenly disrupted whatever plan he had been building. That reaction stayed with me. On the drive home, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Ryan hadn't known Mom needed financial help, which meant this wasn't about rescuing her. It was about something else entirely, something he hadn't wanted either of us to discover. That evening, after making dinner for Mom and pretending everything would be fine, I helped her sort through a stack of unopened mail that had accumulated on the kitchen counter. Most of it was ordinary: utility bills, advertisements, medical statements. Then I found a large cream-colored envelope with a law firm's name printed in the corner. It had already been opened. Mom frowned. "I thought that was junk mail." I carefully unfolded the papers inside. The title on the first page made my pulse quicken. Proposed Estate Planning Amendment. The signature page was blank, but someone had attached sticky notes marking exactly where my mother was supposed to sign. I slowly looked up. "Mom." She looked back at me. I've never seen those papers before. I believed her. Every word. Because tucked behind the last page was a handwritten note in Ryan's unmistakable handwriting. "Once Mom signs this, everything becomes much easier." I suddenly understood something terrifying. Ryan hadn't been preparing for the future. He had been trying to rewrite it while our mother was still alive. And somehow, I had the sinking feeling we had only uncovered the first piece of his plan. I barely slept that night. The unsigned estate planning document sat on my kitchen table long after midnight, illuminated by the small lamp beside the window. I read every page 3 times, hoping I'd somehow misunderstood what they meant. I hadn't. The amendment would transfer almost every important decision about my mother's finances to Ryan if she were ever declared incapable of managing her own affairs. At first glance, it looked reasonable, professional, even compassionate. But the deeper I looked, the more uncomfortable I became. The definition of incapable was disturbingly vague. One doctor's opinion could be enough. The family home could be sold if deemed financially beneficial. Investments could be liquidated. Property could be transferred into trusts without court approval. Everything depended on one person. Ryan. I folded the papers carefully and slipped them back into the envelope. My years as a physical therapist had taught me something that had nothing to do with medicine. People rarely lose their independence all at once. Someone usually takes it from them one small decision at a time. The next morning, I drove back to Mom's house earlier than usual. She was already outside feeding birds. The old tin feeder Dad had built years ago hung from the oak tree beside the porch, its chains creaking softly in the autumn breeze. She smiled when she saw me. Back already? I couldn't stop thinking about yesterday. Neither could she. I kept wondering why strangers were measuring my dining room. She laughed quietly. I've eaten Thanksgiving dinner in that room for 40 years. I didn't know it suddenly belonged to someone else's plans. Her words stayed with me. Someone else's plans. Exactly. After breakfast, I asked as casually as I could, Mom, have you signed anything recently? She frowned. What do you mean? Any legal papers? No. Insurance? No. Powers of attorney? She shook her head. I've signed birthday cards. Does that count? I smiled. I wish it did. Then something occurred to her. Oh. She stood slowly. There was one thing. She disappeared into her bedroom. When she returned, she carried a small leather folder Dad had always kept inside the bedroom dresser. Inside were important family documents, marriage certificate, property deed, insurance policies, military records, everything neatly organized in plastic sleeves. Dad had been meticulous. Mom handed me a folded yellow sticky note. Ryan left this a few months ago. The handwriting was familiar. Mom, don't worry about the paperwork. I'll take care of everything. We just need a couple of signatures next time I'm here. No details, no explanation, just confidence. Too much confidence. When did he write this? Oh. She thought for a moment. Maybe 4 months ago. Did he ever bring those papers? I don't think so. She looked uncertain. Or maybe he did. Then she stopped herself. No? I remember refusing. You refused? He said it was only paperwork. I asked to read it first, and he seemed disappointed. That was interesting. Ryan wasn't used to hearing no. That afternoon, I decided to visit someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Harold Simmons, my father's attorney. He had retired shortly after Dad passed away, but everyone in town still knew where he lived. His small white cottage overlooked a quiet lake just outside Asheville. He answered the door himself. His hair had turned completely white. His shoulders were slightly stooped, but his eyes were just as sharp as I remembered. Claire Bennett. He smiled warmly. You look just like your mother. I hope that's a compliment. It certainly is. He invited me inside. The living room smelled of old books and fresh coffee, exactly the sort of place where difficult truths felt easier to say. I suppose you didn't come all this way just to visit an old lawyer. I smiled. No. He waited. What can I do for you? I explained everything. Ryan, the appraisal company, the estate documents, the note, the strange urgency. Harold listened without interrupting once. When I finished, he remained silent for nearly a minute. Then he leaned back in his chair. I wondered how long it would take. My heart skipped. You knew? I suspected. What? After your father died, Ryan came to see me. I stared at him. He wanted access to your mother's estate file. What did you tell him? I told him no. Why? Because your mother was alive? His answer was so simple it almost made me laugh. Harold continued. He wasn't happy. He insisted your father had wanted him to handle everything. I already knew that wasn't true. Dad trusted both of us, but when it came to important decisions, he always believed Mom should make them herself. Did he come back? Harold nodded slowly. Twice. And I refused twice. I swallowed. What happened after that? He stopped asking. The room fell quiet. Harold removed his glasses. Claire. People don't usually stop pursuing something they desperately want. They simply find another way. Those words settled heavily between us. Another way. Before I left, Harold disappeared into his office. He returned carrying a thin manila envelope. I can't give you confidential documents. I no longer represent your mother. But I can give you something your father specifically instructed me to release if I ever believed someone was attempting to pressure Eleanor regarding her estate. He handed me the envelope. Across the front, in my father's unmistakable handwriting, were 7 simple words. For Claire, only if something feels wrong. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Dad had written that. Years ago, long before any of this had begun. Long before Ryan started asking questions about the house. Long before strangers walked through Mom's living room. Somehow. My father had anticipated that one day someone might try to manipulate the family he had spent a lifetime protecting. Harold watched me carefully. I think it's time you opened it. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter, and beneath it, a copy of a document I had never seen before. At the top, in bold letters, it read, Family Protection Agreement. I had no idea what it was, but something told me Ryan had spent years hoping no one else would ever find it. I didn't open the letter right away. Instead, I held it in both hands, tracing the familiar handwriting with my thumb. My father had been gone for almost 8 years, yet seeing his name written across that envelope made it feel as though he had just stepped out of the room. Harold didn't rush me. He quietly poured another cup of coffee and stared out at the lake. I always hoped you'd never need that, he said. So did I. The paper crackled softly as I unfolded the first page. The date at the top caught my attention immediately. It had been written almost a year before Dad died, long before any of us knew how quickly his illness would progress, long before Ryan began talking about trusts, wills, and real estate. My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, something has happened that made you question whether our family is being protected the way your mother and I intended. I pray I'm wrong. I pray this letter never leaves Harold's office. But if it does, I need you to trust your instincts the way I always trusted mine. I stopped reading for a moment. My throat tightened. Dad had always spoken plainly. He never wasted words. Every sentence mattered. I continued. Your mother has always seen the best in people. It's one of the reasons I fell in love with her. But kindness sometimes attracts those who mistake it for weakness. If anyone ever pressures her into making decisions she doesn't fully understand, I need you to stand beside her, even if that person shares our last name. My eyes blurred. I blinked away the tears before they could fall onto the page. Harold quietly slid a box of tissues across the table without saying a word. I smiled weakly. He smiled back. He had probably witnessed this moment 100 different times in his career. Children discovering the final voices of parents they thought were gone forever. I reached the second page. This one wasn't emotional. It was practical, exactly like Dad. He explained that after seeing several friends manipulated late in life by relatives fighting over property, he had insisted on creating additional legal protections around Mom's estate. Not because he expected betrayal, because he believed preparation was another way of showing love. Attached behind the letter was the document titled Family Protection Agreement. It wasn't a will. It wasn't a trust. It was something different. Harold leaned forward. Read paragraph 6. I found it halfway down the second page. My heart immediately began beating faster. No transfer, sale, refinancing, restructuring, or legal modification involving the Bennett family residence may proceed without Eleanor Bennett personally appearing before independent legal counsel selected by this office. I read it again, then a third time. Independent legal counsel. Harold nodded. Your father insisted your mother never sign anything important in the presence of family members. So Ryan couldn't simply, no. He'd have to convince your mother, and convince me. And I'd have questioned every single page before allowing her signature. I finally understood why Ryan had stopped visiting Harold years ago. He wasn't cooperating. He was an obstacle. Harold folded his hands. Your father trusted both of his children. But he also understood that financial pressure changes people. I never imagined. I couldn't finish the sentence. You never imagined your own brother. No. He gave a slow nod. Neither do most families. When I returned to Mom's house that afternoon, I found her sitting on the back porch, wrapped in Dad's old flannel jacket. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, emotionally. The events of the previous week had exhausted her. She smiled when she saw me. I've been thinking. I know. I don't like secrets. Neither do I. She looked toward the garden. Your father used to say families don't fall apart all at once. They crack slowly. I sat beside her. He was right. For several minutes, we simply watched birds gathering around the feeder. Finally, I handed her Dad's letter. You should read this. She looked surprised. Where did you get it? Harold. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded the pages. I didn't interrupt. I watched her face instead. Sometimes emotions tell a clearer story than words. She smiled during the opening paragraph. Then her eyes filled with tears. By the second page, she was crying silently. When she reached the end, she carefully folded the letter exactly along its original creases. He knew me. He always knew me. I nodded. Yes. She looked toward the empty rocking chair where Dad used to drink coffee every morning. I thought he was protecting the house. She wiped her eyes. He was protecting me? The realization settled over both of us. This had never been about real estate. The house simply happened to be the thing greedy people wanted. Dad's real concern had always been Mom. Her independence, her dignity, her right to make her own decisions. That evening my phone rang. Ryan. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. Hello. His voice sounded unusually cheerful. Hey, Claire. I've been thinking. My stomach tightened. So have I. I think we should all have dinner again. Why? I hate this tension. We're family. Family. The word sounded different now, less comforting, more strategic. When? Tomorrow night. I'll invite Mom. I answered before thinking. Don't. Silence. What do you mean? I said don't. She doesn't need more pressure. I've never pressured her. No. I glanced toward the folder containing Dad's letter, the unsigned estate documents, Ryan's handwritten note, the property evaluation records. Each piece alone might have looked harmless. Together they formed a pattern, one I could no longer ignore. You've been very busy lately, I said quietly. What is that supposed to mean? It means I know more today than I knew last week. His breathing changed, only slightly, but enough. People often reveal themselves in the moments between words. He recovered quickly. I don't know what you've convinced yourself of. You don't have to. I'll see you tomorrow. Before I could answer, he ended the call. An hour later, just as I was locking the front door for the night, headlights swept across Mom's driveway. A black sedan stopped near the mailbox. Neither of us recognized it. A man in a gray suit stepped out carrying a leather briefcase. He walked calmly toward the porch. When I opened the door, he offered a polite smile. Good evening. My name is Thomas Keller. I'm a probate attorney. He looked directly at my mother. I've been asked to discuss several urgent estate matters with you. Mom frowned. I didn't ask for an attorney. I know. He smiled again. Your son did. At that exact moment, I knew Ryan wasn't backing down. He had simply moved to the next step of his plan. And this time, he had brought his own lawyer. For a moment, no one spoke. The porch light cast long shadows across the weathered floorboards, and the only sound came from the crickets hidden somewhere beyond the garden. The man standing in front of us looked to be in his late 50s. His charcoal suit was perfectly pressed, his silver tie neatly centered. He carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to difficult conversations. My name is Thomas Keller, he repeated. I apologize for arriving without notice. My mother remained seated in the porch swing. I don't remember inviting you. His smile never disappeared. I understand. I was asked to stop by on behalf of your son. I know exactly who sent you, she answered calmly. I just don't know why he thinks he can. For the first time, Mr. Keller seemed slightly uncomfortable. He shifted the leather briefcase from one hand to the other. Mrs. Bennett, Ryan is concerned about your future. My mother looked at him for several seconds before replying. My future? Yes. I'm sitting on my own porch. I'm drinking my own tea. And I planted those roses myself this morning. She pointed toward the flower beds. Which part of my future seems confusing to you? The attorney cleared his throat. There are legal matters that would be easier to organize now rather than later. I stepped forward. If you're referring to estate planning, Mrs. Bennett already has legal representation. He looked at me politely. I'm aware. Then this conversation is over. It doesn't have to be. It already is. I expected him to argue. Instead, he slowly opened his briefcase. I was hoping Mrs. Bennett would at least review these documents. He removed a thick folder. My mother's expression changed immediately. I've seen enough paperwork lately. I won't be signing anything. I wasn't asking for a signature tonight. He sounded sincere. Only an opportunity to explain. I glanced toward the folder. Its cover carried the logo of Keller and Whitmore Legal Group. Professional. Expensive. Ryan wasn't acting alone anymore. He was investing money into whatever plan he had created. That realization worried me more than I wanted to admit. People don't spend thousands of dollars on attorneys unless they expect something valuable in return. Mom surprised both of us. Leave the folder. Mr. Keller looked relieved. You'll read it? I'll read anything. She looked directly into his eyes. That doesn't mean I'll believe it. He nodded respectfully. I wouldn't expect otherwise. He placed the folder on the porch table. As he turned to leave, he paused beside his car. Mrs. Bennett. She looked up. Your son genuinely believes he's protecting this family. After he drove away, neither of us moved for several moments. Finally, Mom sighed. That's what scares me. What? When people convince themselves they're doing the right thing. Inside the folder were nearly 80 pages. Most of them were harmless. Information about trusts, estate taxes, property management, retirement planning. It all looked perfectly ordinary. Too ordinary. Professionally assembled documents often hide their most important details in the places people rarely read. I started with the last 20 pages. Dad used to call it reading backward. If someone wants to hide something, he'd say, they usually put it near the end. 23 minutes later, I found it. One paragraph, barely 6 lines long, buried inside an appendix. If my mother signed the proposed agreement, Ryan would become her co-trustee immediately. Not after she became incapacitated. Immediately, which meant he would gain legal authority to participate in financial decisions while she was still perfectly capable of making them herself. I read the paragraph twice, then 3 times. Mom looked up from her tea. What is it? I slid the papers across the table. Read paragraph 42. She adjusted her glasses. The longer she read, the quieter she became. When she finished, she slowly removed her glasses. He never mentioned this. Of course he didn't. He said this was only to help me organize paperwork. I nodded. This isn't organization. It's control. The following morning, I made copies of every document. One set stayed with me. One went into the fireproof safe Dad had installed years earlier. Another would go to Harold. I wasn't taking chances anymore. As I organized the papers, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Normally, I ignored calls like that. This time I answered. Hello? The voice on the other end hesitated. Is this Claire Bennett? Yes. My name is Susan Harper. I work at First Carolina Bank. I frowned. Okay. I'm sorry to bother you. I probably shouldn't even be calling. Every instinct I had suddenly became alert. What happened? Another pause. Then she lowered her voice. Your brother has been here 3 times this month. The room seemed to grow very still. What was he doing? He kept asking questions about your mother's accounts. My grip tightened around the phone. What kind of questions? He wanted to know what documents would be required if someone else needed to help manage her finances. I closed my eyes. Did the bank give him any information? No, we refused. But she hesitated again. I thought someone should know. Why? Because he seemed very confident. Confident about what? That it would only be a matter of time. After ending the call, I drove straight to the bank. Susan met me in a private office. She looked nervous. I hope I didn't overstep. You may have protected my mother. She visibly relaxed. I recognized your last name. My own mother went through something similar after my father passed away. What exactly did Ryan ask? She opened a notebook. I wrote everything down after his last visit. She turned it toward me. The notes were brief, professional, accurate. Can current accounts be converted into joint management? What medical documentation would be required? Would one child need approval from the other? How quickly could changes take effect? I stared at the page. These weren't casual questions. They were part of a plan, a carefully researched plan. Did he ever mention my mother being ill? Susan nodded. He implied her memory had been getting worse. I felt something inside me snap. He said that? I'm afraid so. My mother doesn't have dementia. I know. That's why I became uncomfortable. When I returned to the farmhouse, Mom was sitting at the kitchen table sorting old photographs. She smiled. Look what I've found. She handed me a faded picture. Dad stood behind both of us, one arm around Mom, the other resting on my shoulder. Ryan was laughing at something outside the frame. We looked happy, not perfect, just real. I stared at the photograph much longer than I expected. When did we lose this? Mom looked at the same picture. I don't think families lose themselves in one day. She gently placed it back on the table. They lose themselves one decision at a time. That evening, just before sunset, Harold called. His voice sounded more serious than usual. Claire, I need you to come to my office tomorrow morning. Is everything all right? I found something while reviewing your father's archived files. What is it? It concerns Ryan. My pulse quickened. What did you find? A long silence followed. Then Harold answered quietly. Your brother came to see me more than twice. I frowned. You told me he visited after Dad died. I wasn't entirely accurate. What do you mean? He first came. Harold exhaled slowly. 3 months before your father passed away. I couldn't speak. Before Dad died? Ryan had already been asking about the estate. While our father was still alive? And suddenly, an unbearable question entered my mind. How long had my brother been planning to inherit a house before the people living in it were even gone? Harold's office looked exactly the way I remembered. The same walnut desk, the same floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, the same grandfather clock quietly marking each passing minute. Nothing had changed, except me. 24 hours earlier, I still believed I was trying to stop my brother from taking advantage of our mother. Now, I was beginning to wonder whether this story had started years before any of us realized. Harold was already waiting when I arrived. A thick file rested on his desk. Unlike the envelope my father had left behind, this one looked worn from years of storage. He didn't greet me with small talk. Instead, he rested one hand on the folder. I debated whether you should ever see this. I sat down. What changed your mind? He looked at me for a long moment. Your father expected this day might come. A chill ran through me. He slowly opened the folder. Inside were handwritten meeting notes, calendar entries, copies of letters, everything dated nearly 8 years earlier, just months before Dad died. Harold adjusted his glasses. I keep detailed records of every important client meeting. He slid the first page toward me. At the top was a date, 3 months before Dad's death. Beneath it, one sentence had been circled in blue ink. Meeting requested by Ryan Bennett regarding future property ownership. I stared at the page. He came alone? Harold nodded. He said he wanted to understand what would happen if your father's health declined. At first, I believed he was simply worried. But then, he handed me another page. This one contained his own handwritten notes. I recognized my father's name, my mother's, mine, and Ryan's. One line had been underlined twice. Client's son repeatedly asked whether ownership could be transferred before death through incapacity planning. I looked up. He was asking how to take control before Dad even passed away. Harold's expression was solemn. Yes. My stomach turned. For years, I had blamed greed on opportunity. But greed doesn't appear overnight. It grows quietly, patiently, waiting for the right moment. I confronted your father. Harold's words pulled me back. You did. I had an obligation. What did he say? Harold smiled sadly. He wasn't surprised. Those words hit harder than I expected. He already knew. He told me Ryan had become increasingly interested in the financial side of the family. He said the questions no longer sounded like curiosity. They sounded like strategy. I lowered my eyes. Dad had seen it. He simply hadn't wanted to believe where it might lead. Harold opened another document. This meeting changed everything. Wait, it was a legal memorandum summarizing a conversation with my father. One paragraph stood out immediately. Client requests additional safeguards to ensure surviving spouse cannot be pressured by family members regarding estate decisions. Another. Client specifically requests independent legal review before any transfer involving the residents. Then another. Client expresses concern that emotional manipulation may occur after his passing. I felt tears forming again, not because of the legal language, because every sentence reflected the same thing. Dad hadn't been trying to control the future. He had been trying to protect Mom from it. I wish he had told us. Harold leaned back. He tried. What do you mean? He invited both you and Ryan to several meetings. I frowned. I don't remember. You couldn't attend. You were treating patients after that highway accident. I remembered immediately. The rehabilitation clinic had been overwhelmed for weeks. And Ryan? Harold sighed. He canceled every appointment, always with another excuse. Business travel, client meetings, flights, emergencies. There was always something, until eventually. Your father stopped asking. On my drive back to the farmhouse, I couldn't stop thinking about that. How many opportunities had existed to prevent all of this? How many conversations had never happened? Sometimes families don't fall apart because nobody cared. Sometimes they fall apart because everyone believed there would always be another chance. When I arrived, Mom was sitting at the kitchen table doing the crossword puzzle. She smiled. Any news? I hesitated. Some. I didn't want to burden her with every painful detail, but I also refused to keep secrets from her. So I told her everything. Ryan's early meetings, Dad's concerns, the legal protections, the notes Harold had preserved. She listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she folded the newspaper neatly. I've been asking myself one question all morning. What? Where did I fail him? You didn't. I must have. No. She looked toward the window. I raised 2 children. One became you. The other became... She couldn't finish. I reached across the table and took her hand. This isn't your failure. It's his choice. She squeezed my fingers. I know. But mothers have a hard time separating those two things. That evening, I decided to do something I should have done weeks earlier. I called Ryan. He answered on the second ring. Claire, we need to meet. I've been saying that. Tomorrow. He hesitated. Fine. Where? Mom's house. No, I don't think that's a good idea. It wasn't a suggestion. Another pause. Finally, all right. The next afternoon, we met at a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. Ryan arrived wearing a navy blazer and the confident smile he always seemed to wear before negotiations. He sat across from me. I'm glad you finally decided to talk. I studied him carefully. For the first time in my life. I wasn't looking at my little brother. I was looking at a man whose actions no longer matched his words. He ordered coffee. So, what did you want to discuss? I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. Harold's meeting record, dated 3 months before Dad died. Ryan's smile disappeared. Only for a second. But I saw it. Recognition. You've been busy. So have you. He picked up the page, read it, placed it back on the table. I don't know what you think this proves. It proves you were planning something while Dad was still alive. I was planning. He looked directly at me. To protect this family. No, to control it. He leaned forward. You've always believed Dad trusted you more. This isn't about trust. It never was. His voice became quieter. You don't understand what was happening. Then explain it. He looked around the cafe before answering. I can't. Why? Because someone else is involved. I froze. What? His eyes met mine, for the first time since all of this began. He looked genuinely nervous. I wasn't the one who came up with the idea. Every instinct told me he was finally telling the truth, but if Ryan hadn't started this plan, then who had? Before I could ask another question, the bell above the cafe door rang. Ryan looked toward the entrance. The color drained from his face. He stood so abruptly that his chair nearly fell backward. "You shouldn't have come here," he whispered. I turned around. An elegant woman in a cream-colored coat had just stepped inside. She looked directly at Ryan, then at me. And without introducing herself, she said 5 words that made the entire room seem to stop breathing. "We need to discuss your father's second estate file."